Well, we have another J.W. Burns classic Sasquatch encounter story. This one is a wild story. Now, for you guys that are new to the channel, J.W. Burns was a school teacher on the Chehalis Indian Reserve in British Columbia, Canada. Now, this story is told to him by a Native American named Charlie Victor. He told this story to J.W. Burns in the 1920s. That is when J.W. Burns wrote these stories down. So I'm going to give you a little quick hint on this story, a little quick sneak peek. Charlie Victor was a great hunter, and he went out and he shot a wild boy, a feral boy, and a female Sasquatch came to the wild boy's aid. Wait until you guys hear this story. I can't wait to tell it to you. Before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and show you the locations of these occurrences so you guys can picture in your own mind when I'm telling you the story what's happening and where this location is. I will go ahead and show that to you really quick, and then we'll get into this wild story. Okay, so this is the area. Obviously, if you guys have watched the previous videos, you know J.W. Burns was a school teacher here at the Chehalis Native American Reservation right here in this area. But in today's story, we are going to be going, well, the first part of the story, we're going to be going over this way towards Yale. Now, Yale is right here, as you guys can see. I'll zoom in right there. There is Yale, and he talks about caves in this area about 5 or 6 miles away, and a lake. And to the best of my knowledge, where they're picking the salmon berries, here's the lake that he's talking about right there. And he was in there picking the salmon berries also, and the cave is in this area also. And then his last story, where he's talking about the wild boy and the Sasquatch coming to his aid, is over here by Hatzik. Hatzik is right in this area over here. You guys can see it right there, Hatzik. And the plateau he's talking about is right there where it says Dewdney Peak. That's going to be the plateau right there. So all of this is happening, all these stories from J.W. Burns is literally right here in this area. And if you guys know, before I made that story about Ruby Creek is right here, as you guys can see. And once again, you see what the name of that park is right there, right? So this area, oh, one more thing before we get onto it. Once again, they're going to be talking about the Douglas dialect, and right here is Port Douglas. So if you guys can see, all these areas right here are all bunched together, and you see how wild this area is. It's a really wild wilderness. Even to this day, there's not very many people up further north than Port Douglas right there. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys those areas so you guys know what I'm talking about, and when I show you guys in the video the 3D imagery of the satellite Google Earth, you guys will know what I'm talking about. Okay, now that I showed you guys those locations, let's get into Charlie Victor's story. Charlie Victor belonged to the Squaw Reserve near Chilliwack. In his younger days, he was known as one of the best hunters in the province and had many thrilling adventures in his time. I asked, did he know anything about the hairy ape-like men who were supposed to inhabit the distant mountains? Charlie smiled and answered that he had a slight acquaintance with them. He had been in what he thought was one of their dwellings, and that is not all, he said. I met and spoke to one of their women, and I shot. But we're going to go ahead and let Charlie tell the story himself, says J.W. Burns. The strange people, of whom there are but a few now, rarely seen and seldom met, said the old hunter, are known by the name of Sasquatch, or the hairy mountain men. The first time I came to know about these people, continued the old man, I did not see anybody. 3 young men and myself were picking salmon berries on a rocky mountain slope some 5 or 6 miles from the old town of Yale. In our search for berries, we suddenly stumbled upon a large opening in the side of the mountain. This discovery greatly surprised all of us, for we knew every foot of the mountain and never knew nor heard there was a cave in the vicinity. Outside the mouth of the cave, there was an enormous boulder. We peered into the cavity, but couldn't see anything. We gathered some pitchwood, lighted it, and began to explore. But before we got very far from the entrance of the cave, we came upon a sort of stone dwelling or enclosure. It was a crude affair. We couldn't make a thorough examination, for our pitchwood kept going out. We left intending to return in a couple days and go on exploring. Old Indians to whom we told the story of our discovery warned us not to venture near the cave again, as it was surely occupied by the Sasquatch. That was the first time I heard about the hairy men that inhabit the mountains. We, however, disregarded the advice of the old men and sneaked off to explore the cave, but to our great disappointment found the boulder rolled back into its mouth and fitting it so nicely that you might suppose it had been made for that purpose. Charlie intimated that he hoped to have enough money someday to buy sufficient dynamite to blow open the cave of the Sasquatch and see how far it extends through the mountain. The Indian then took up the thread of his story and told of his first meeting with one of these men. A number of other Indians and himself were bathing in a small lake near Yale. He was dressing when suddenly, out from behind a rock, only a few feet away, stepped a nude, hairy man. "Oh, he was a big, big man," continued the old hunter. "He looked at me for a moment. His eyes were so kind-looking that I was about to speak to him when he turned about and walked into the forest." At the same place 2 weeks later, Charlie, together with several of his companions, saw the giant, but this time he ran towards the mountain. This was 20 years after the discovery of the cave. Charlie shoots a Sasquatch boy. I don't know if I should tell you or not about the awful experience I had with these wicked people about 15 years ago in the mountains near Hatsick. The old man rubbed his knee and said he disliked recalling that disagreeable meeting. It was a tragedy from which he had not yet fully recovered. Old Charlie, who says he talked to a Sasquatch woman and wounded one of their boys. I was hunting in the mountains near Hatsick, he resumed. I had my dog with me. I came out on a plateau where there were several big cedar trees. The dog stood before one of the trees and began to growl and bark at it. On looking up to see what excited him, I noticed a large hole in the tree 7 feet from the ground. The dog pawed and leapt upon the trunk and looked at me to raise him up, which I did, and he went into the hole. The next moment a muffled cry came from the hole. I said to myself, the dog is tearing into a bear, and with my rifle ready, I urged the dog to drive him out, and out came something I took for a bear. I shot, and it fell with a thud to the ground. Murder! Oh my! I spoke to myself in surprise and alarm, for the thing I had shot looked to me like a boy. He was nude. He was about 12 or 14 years of age. In his description of the boy, Charlie said that his hair was black and woolly. Wounded and bleeding, the poor fellow sprawled upon the ground, but when I drew close to examine the extent of his injury, he let out a wild yell, or rather a call, as if he were appealing for help. From across the mountain, a long way off, rolled a booming voice. Near and more near came the voice, and every now and again the boy would return an answer, as if directing the owner of the voice. Less than a half an hour, out from the depths of the forest, came the strangest and wildest creature one could possibly see. I raised my rifle not to shoot, but in case I would have to defend myself. The hairy creature, for that is what it was, walked towards me without the slightest fear. The wild person was a woman. Her face was almost negro black, and her long straight hair fell to her waist. In height she would be about 6 feet, but her chest and shoulders were well above the average in breadth. Charlie remarked that he had met several wild people in his time, but never seen anyone half so savage in appearance as this woman. The old brave confessed he was really afraid of her. In my time, said the old man, and this is no boast, I have in more than one emergency strangled bear with my hands. But I'm sure if that wild woman laid hands on me, she'd break every bone in my body. She cast a hasty glance at the boy. Her face took on a demoniacal expression when she saw that he was bleeding. She turned upon me savagely and in the Douglas dialect said, "You have shot my friend." I explained in the same language, for I am part Douglas myself, that I had mistaken the boy for a bear and I was sorry. She did not reply, but began a sort of wild frisk or dance around the boy, chanting in a loud voice for a minute or two. And as if in answer to her, from the distant woods came the same sort of chanting troll. In her hand she carried something like a snake, about 6 feet in length, but thinking over the matter since, I believe it was the intestine of some animal, but whatever it was, she constantly struck the ground with it. She picked up the boy with one hairy hand with as much ease as if he had been a wax doll. At this point in the story, Charlie began to make pictures in the sand with his maple stick, and paused or reflected so long that we thought he had come to the end of his narrative, when he suddenly looked up and said with a grin, "Perhaps I better tell you the rest of it, although I know you'll not believe it." There was a challenge of defiance in her eyes and dark looks, went on Charlie, as she faced and spoke to me a second time, and the dreadful words she used set me shaking. "You remember them?" I asked. "Remembered him," he repeated. "They still ring around my old ears like the echo of a thunderstorm." She pointed the snake thing like at me and said, "Siwash, you'll never kill another bear." The old hunter's eyes moistened when he admitted that he had not shot a bear or anything else since that fatal day. Her words, an expression, and savage, avenging glint in her dark, fiery eyes filled me with fear, confessed the Indian, and I felt so exhausted from her unwavering gaze that I was no longer able to keep her covered with my rifle, so I let it drop. Charlie has been paralyzed for the last 8 years, and he is inclined to think that the words of the wild woman had something to do with it. The old man told how his brave dog, that never turned away from bear nor cougar, lay whimpering and shivering at his feet while the Sasquatch woman was speaking. "Just," said Charlie, as if he understood the meaning of her words. The old man said that she spoke the words "Yahoo! Yahoo!" frequently in a loud voice, and always received a similar reply from the mountain. The old hunter felt sure that the woman looked somewhat like the wild man he had seen at Yale many years before, although the woman was darker of the two. He did not think the boy belonged to the Sasquatch people, because he was white and she called him her friend, reasoned Charlie. They must have stolen him or run across him in some other way, he added. Indians, said Charlie, have always known that the wild men lived in the distant mountains, within 60 and 100 miles east of Vancouver, and of course they may live in other places throughout the province, but I have never heard of it. It is my opinion, since I met that wild woman 15 years ago, that because she spoke the Indian Douglas tongue, these creatures must be related to the Indian. Okay, so there you guys go. Another J.W. Burns Native American account that he got from interviewing these Native Americans. Now, what do you guys think of this story? Do you think that these creatures are some kind of Native American tribe that lived wild in the wilderness with no clothes and all that? Or do you think it's possible that these Sasquatches are in fact an ancient type of human that can learn languages? So if this is an ancient human that is the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, you would think that they would be smart enough to learn a language, especially if they were interacting with these Native American tribes. And it seems to me The Douglas tribe had a lot of interactions with these creatures. Now this area is known for all kinds of encounters with these creatures. From the Ruby Creek video I did, all these J.W. Burns stories, and lots more. So this area is a hot spot for these creatures. Well, at least it used to be. And I'm sure if people were spending time in the wilderness like they used to back in the day, they would probably run across these creatures even to this day maybe. Now leave me some comments, let me know what you think about this story. Once again, I just give you the information, read you the story, show you the locations, and let you guys make up your own minds to what you believe. I'm not ever here to tell you what to believe. It's up to you to make up your own minds on this. There are no other channels out there that are showing you these locations of these occurrences that I'm aware of. So that's where we're going to leave it. Always remember, where there is a WILLSTAR, there is definitely a way. And we will talk to you guys later. Take care.